So on this one, I'm going to choose to times by 4 first. Okay, so I've decided to times by 4. So these cancel each other out, and I'm left with 3 times r on the right side. And then 20 times 4, let's see, what is that, 96? So now I've got 3 times r equals 96. Okay. Let me just double check that. 480, 16 to 96. All right, so now to get rid of the r times 3, I'm going to divide by 3. I'm going to divide both sides by 3. So now I'm left with r equals, let's see, 32. Okay. So let's look at what would happen. Let's look at what would happen if we did, instead of dividing or timesing by 4 first, if we divided by 3 first. So I would get 24 divided by 3 equals 8. And then these cancel each other out. So I'm left with r divided by 4. So now I'm going to times to get rid of the 4. And on this side, these cancel out with r. And then 8 times 4 is 32. So I'm going to get the same answer either way. Again, when you have addition and subtraction in the equations, you want to try and get rid of those first, because otherwise it's going to make your problem look funky if you try to do the multiplication or division first. But if you just have multiplication and division, really doesn't matter. It's going to take you about the same amount of time, and you're going to get the same answer. All right, let's look at one more of these kind. Just change my pictures here. Let's look at this one. So this is one of the error analysis from the math book, and we have obviously there's a red X there, so that means they did something wrong. So X does not actually equal 7. So let's look and see what they did. And if you remember from class, me telling you the best way that I know how, a lot of times we'll look at these and we'll say, well, I have no idea what they did, right? I'm looking at it and I'm like, I don't have any idea what they did. It seems overwhelming to try to figure it out. The best strategy that I use, that I've found, for me anyway, and that I've seen works for students, is to do it the way you think it's supposed to be done first. So do it the correct way first. So in other words, if we had X divided by 4 equals 28, okay, and I'm going to change that too so we can see it a little better. So X divided by 4 equals 28. What would we do, or what are we doing to the X? And what do we do to get it all by itself? So we're going to multiply by 4, and I'm actually not going to use, I'm going to use this multiplication symbol because I've got an X in here already, and that's going to be confusing. So I'm going to multiply by 4, So now these cancel each other out. I've got X on this side. And let's see, 4 times 8 is 32. 8, 9, 10, 11. So I've got X equals 112. So that's how I would do the problem. now that I have something to compare it to, I'm going to go back and look and see what they did. So here we have x divided by 4 equals 28. So in this next step, so this is step 1, step 2, they had x divided by 4 divided by 4 equals 28 divided by 4. So in our step 2, what did we do? We timesed by 4. They divided by 4. So were they right or were we right? Well, we already know that they were wrong. Okay, but if we didn't know that, let's look at if dividing by 4 makes sense. If we want to get x by itself, what would we do to get x by itself? We would multiply by 4, not divide by 4. So the error that they made was they should have multiplied by 4 instead of dividing by 4. And when they multiply by 4, the correct answer that we get is x equals 112. Okay, I hope that one made sense. Let's look at, all right, so let's look at some word problems. Let's see, 45 basketball players participate in a tournament. Write and solve an equation to find the number of 3-person teams they can form. So we're actually going to write an equation to match this problem. So we've got 45 basketball players, so we know we're going to have a 45 in there somewhere. And then we want to know how many 3-person teams they can form. So we don't know how many 3-person teams they can form. We don't know. So what do we use for an unknown amount? We use a variable. And I'm actually going to label each one of these things so I know how they relate to each other. So 45 total participants. Okay, so I've got 45 total participants. I'm going to say n, actually I'm going to use t, number of 3-person teams. And then I have my 3, and that is number of people in a team. So I've got the number of 3-person teams. I've got 45 basketball players, and I have the number of people in each team. So how am I going to take these? How am I now going to take these and put them in an equation that matches these relationships? So 45 total participants. So I'm going to use that and say, when a total is usually what comes after an equal sign. So 45, I'm going to say something equals 45, right? Then I'm looking at the number of 3-person teams, and I want to know how many of those there are. I want to know how many of T there are. So I've got, and I know that there's 3 people on each team. Okay, so that means however many teams there are, I'm going to times that by 3, and that's going to give me the total number of people. So now I have my equation that I can now solve. So I've got 3t equals 45. 3 times t equals 45. So what are we doing to the variable? We're timesing it by 3. So to get rid of it, we're going to divide by 3. These are going to cancel out. I'm going to be left with t, and 45 divided by 3 equals 15. So does that make sense for my problem? Well, if I have 45 basketball players and they're on 3-person teams, I would divide 45 by 3, and that would give me the total number of teams that I could have. So that works. All right, so let's look at another word problem here. All right, so a theater has 1,200 seats. I'm going to circle that because that sounds like that's important information. Each row has 20 seats. Write and solve an equation to find the number of rows in the theater. One of the biggest challenges with math in general is knowing where to start. So if you can just start with what you do know, then it usually becomes clear what you do next. So what I do know is that I need an equation. And I know that if I have an equation, that means there's going to be an equal sign. So if a theater has 1,200 seats, so 1,200 is the number of seats, okay? And each row has 20 seats. So 20 is number, and this was the number of total seats. So number of seats per row, okay? Find the number of rows in the theater. So there's my unknown. I need to know the number of rows, and I'm going to use R, number of rows. Okay, so find the number of rows in the theater. A theater has 1,200 total seats, right? So even though it doesn't say total, I know that that's the total amount. So I'm going to put my 1,200 over here like it's a total. And then I know that each row has 20 seats. So I don't know my number of rows, but I do know that each of them has 20 seats. So whatever R is, I'm going to have to multiply that by 20 in order to get the total number of rows. So we already discussed that we're multiplying 20 times R. So to get rid of that, we're going to divide R by 20. And we'll do that to both sides. Then these will go away. So then we have 20 goes into 1,200. Let's see, 20 goes into 105 times. 5 times 12 is 60. So we'll say that goes in 60 times. All right, I hope this made sense. Don't stress out too much about these word problems. We're going to do a lot more practice with them, and that's just what it takes in order to become more familiar with them. If you have questions, please reach out to me. I'll be doing another Zoom meeting on tomorrow at noon. So hope to see you there if you have questions.